Was he ever involved in any of the decision makings during your time?
Yeah, well, you got to look at it this way, Dan. He wrote the checks. He was the owner.
Sure.
And so obviously I couldn't have done some of the things I did unless he okayed it because he was going to pay the money. And so we had to be involved together a lot that way. But, really, again, in all seriousness, his first 4 years, he borrowed $140 million and he was trying to pay the bills. And, he's as charismatic a guy. He's the best businessman I've ever been around in my life. He's passionate. He works around the clock, and so, he did some great things. But those early years, personnel and football wise, it was pretty well over in our department.
The biggest, most important draft in the history of this Philadelphia football franchise. The JAKIB Media Sports 2022 NFL Draft Special. Live on 6abc.com from the Ocean Casino and Resort in Atlantic City. Presented by First Trust Bank, the official bank of the Philadelphia Eagles. IBEW Local 98, Stateside Vodka, United Healthcare, Mesa Law, 6ABC, and Budweiser, the official beer of the Philly sports fan.
National Football Show with your boy Big Stills. Don't forget, Thursday night, Ocean's Casino. We will have a gigantic draft party there. Seth Joyner, D. Gunn, everyone's going to be there starting at 8 o'clock Eastern time for the NFL draft. Before I get into the draft, I want to tell you guys something about swagger. My next guest, he invented it. And I didn't know what swagger meant except for this. To me, it meant winning. We got to talk all the trash we wanted when we played at Miami. And I just remember this. Coach always said, and we always felt, I remember Danny Stubbs and myself and Jerome always saying, hey, man, if we're putting receipts out there, Jimmy's going to want to come collect them, man, if we don't win these ball games. So I had no idea what it was. And now Jimmy's got a book out. Coach Johnson joins us now here. And Coach, it's funny, everyone always asks me, I get asked, even Mario Cristobal asked me, Sills, what does swagger mean to you? And I go, winning. I go, that's all I remember, Coach. Coach used to go around to all the, to the positions, offensive line, defensive line, linebackers. Everything was always done at a sense of urgency, Coach. I mean, everything, running to water, everything. To me, that's what swagger was, and I'm so glad that the book is out there that everybody can see what it really means, because it's not a T-shirt and a hat.
well, swagger, Dan, really for me was just our team playing with great confidence. A lot of people, misinterpret swagger to think that, it's celebrations, taunting, penalties, et cetera, et cetera. Swagger was our team being totally confident that they were going to win. And the way that they were confident that they were going to win was that they had put in the work prior to playing the game. As you know, our practices were a lot more difficult than the games because we would scrimmage 1 versus 1s, like 3 times a week. And so by the time we got to Saturday, our guys looked forward to playing another team.
I had Coach Wannstedt on, and every time Coach Johnson would go inside drill, we'd be like, oh, man. And it's 1s versus 1s, and we're sitting there pounding. I remember I had Highsmith on a couple weeks ago, Coach, and Alonzo goes, do you remember? We're sitting there, and we're just talking, and I'm screaming, got to run these guys. Me and Jerome just start laughing because we're beating each other up. Coach, they never allow that stuff today, man.
Oh, I know it. They barely even touch each other during practice nowadays. But it was a different time. Of course, that was a long time ago, and we had a great run there. Of course, University of Miami, and of course, we had a great run at the Dallas Cowboys. But we had very physical teams. We had physical practices.
Coach, I put value charts every year together. I posted another one. And I got to tell you, man, these things take forever to put together.
Right.
These value charts. And I always feel uncomfortable, Coach, when I have the number one pick in the draft and I put 1,000 next to it and I'm doing this. There's no way Coach looked at that and go, that's the 1,000th valued pick. How hard was it for you when you put this chart together to stick to your fundamentals when you were going through a draft?
Well, my first draft, we drafted pretty well. Our first 4 picks were all academic All-Americans. They were all Pro Bowlers, Troy Aikman, Daryl Johnston, Mark Stepnoski, Tony Tolbert. But I thought that, back then, Dan, people didn't trade. There wasn't fantasy football. There wasn't a whole lot of trading going on. But I just took the philosophy that, if I didn't want a particular player, the best player available, I'd trade out of that pick. And, I'd trade up, trade down. And in fact, in the 5 years I was at Dallas, I made 51 trades. And really there was, like, for instance, the New York Giants made 1 trade during that 5-year period, and that was with me. The teams just didn't trade. But I needed a tool to help me in making all those trades. And so what I did, I had one of the guys in the organization crunch the numbers. And, I said, hey, go ahead and get all the trades that have been made here for the last 4 or 5 years, pick for pick. And we can do a bar graph there or a line graph, and we can arbitrarily put numbers on it. And so it was just a tool for me to make trades, in an instant. I can be on the clock and be 4 or 5 minutes. And, I'll say, hey, I'll swap ones. I'll give you my 3, et cetera. In fact, that's what we did to trade up to get Emmett. And I knew the value of all these picks. Well, the other teams didn't have this chart, and they didn't have that tool to help them make the trades. So we got a lot of value out of that for years. But then, of course, Wanstead goes to Chicago, Norv Turner goes to Washington. They take the chart with them. Now everybody in the league has a chart. Now they've tweaked it a little bit because of the salary cap, et cetera, and they should tweak it. But it's amazing to me. I talked to Brett Veach not too long ago, and he said, hey, I used your chart to trade for Brown. And I talked to Ozzie Newsome. He said, I used your chart to trade for Peters. And so, after 30 years, they're still using this chart.
Absolutely, Coach. Coach, I've never asked you this because to me, the way you ran your scouting department versus your coaching staff, it looks to me, Coach, that your scouting department and evaluating talent was just as important as your coaching staff that were coaching your players on Sunday. So am I right, Coach, that you would look at Bob Ackles, who you worked with while you were there in Dallas, that side of the table there was completely different than the coaching staff. So a lot of detail went into, and you had to trust those guys that were evaluating it for you to use that chart. How much of a process was that for you too? I don't think people bring that up with you enough.
Well, back then, the coaches didn't, really do a whole lot of the evaluation. It was kind of the old deal, coaches coach, personnel people handle personnel, and players play. But I wanted our coaches to evaluate these players. And so we were one of the few teams that sent our coaches on the road. I went on the road myself. And, I looked at players. I interviewed players. I thought that was an advantage for us coming out of college because we knew these college players. Just for instance, I took Mark Stepnoski because of the way he went up against you, Dan, in that Pitt Miami game.
Hold on. I got a game ball over that guy. Okay. I got a game ball over that guy. So I'm going to keep that out there. You gave me that game ball now.
But anyway, our coaches evaluated these players. And so I took the information from all the coaches evaluating these players, and then all the scouts evaluating their particular area, and I put it all together to go ahead and make these picks. And so we were fortunate, again, knowing these college players. That gave us an advantage for 2 or 3 years.
Coach, how did you come to the decision to move Wisniewski, who turned out to be a heck of a ball player for the Raiders, and Hall of Fame type player? I mean, what was the decision there? Because he was a second-round pick, I think, that you guys took him.
Right. He was actually, I was working with Al Davis on this one, and I wanted Daryl Johnston, but I didn't want to take him, at the top of the second round. And so I was able to make a trade with Al. And so I picked up a 3 plus making the swap. And so I still got Daryl Johnston. But Wisniewski was the pick. And, we ran out of time. And so Al says, hey, go ahead and make the pick, and then we'll swap it later. And so Wisniewski was upset because he wanted to come to the Cowboys. But he was a great player. Of course, Daryl was a great player for us as well.
Coach, how important was it for your coaching staff? And by the way, I played for the greatest coaching staff in the history of college football, in my opinion. How important was it for those guys to be good talent evaluators, let alone really great position coaches?
I think more than anything else, Dan, I had to know my coaches. For instance, I knew Butch Davis was a good evaluator, but, if you listen to Butch, all of them were going to be all pros. And then, with Tony Wise, none of them could play. In fact, Tony was a horrible recruiter because they'd say, hey, Coach, you think I can play my freshman year? And he'd say, play your freshman year. You realize how good we are? You won't play until you're a junior or a senior. And so obviously the player would go somewhere else. But Wanstead was, he was right down the middle. Plus I knew my scouts. For instance, Jeff Smith was one of my scouts. He graded them down if they had a bad character. Jim, one of my guys, he wanted to take a player, and he's kind of like Butch. They were all going to be all pro. John Wooten, he wanted offensive lineman. He's the one who told me John Wooten said, hey, you've got to take Mandrich. I said, I don't want Mandrich. I'm going to take Troy Aikman. He said, no, Mandrich will be an all-pro tackle for 10 years. But now, of course, everybody kind of forgets that now. They said, oh, for sure, we're going to take Troy Aikman. But I had to know my scouts. I had to know my coaches and how they could evaluate.
Couple last questions here for you. Coach, I talked to Billy Ray Smith Sr. a couple of years back when he was alive, and I asked him about the head coach at Arkansas. And you know what he said? He goes, he wasn't really a head coach. He was more of a delegator. Did you take a lot of his fundamentals, Coach, that you were passed on when you were there at Arkansas and how you ran your football teams? Because from what I'm understanding, Coach Broyles was a guy that he was more of a guy that would be a delegator than he was really a position coach. Is that fair?
Yeah, Frank Broyles. I was fortunate to work with some great coaches. Frank Broyles was a very smart individual. He really taught us the percentages. Winning football is what he taught us. But he had good assistants. Jim McKenzie was a great, defensive coach. We had Hayden Fry. We had Doug Dickey. We had some really great assistant coaches as well. I worked for Chuck Fairbanks. He was as organized as a coach as I ever was around. I worked for Johnny Majors, probably the most enthusiastic coach I was ever around, optimistic, and, he was always excited. I mean, so with a lot of different guys. Just for instance, with Frank Broyles, one of my assistants, I was defensive coordinator, was Joe Gibbs, who was my defensive end coach. And so I worked with a lot of great coaches.
Absolutely. Coach, finally here, I'll tell you what, and I know you see me tweet this out. It aggravates the living hell out of me every time I hear people saying, like Skip Bayless, that Jerry Jones was involved with the Charles Haley pick. And I keep telling people, Kevin Fagan called me and told me what happened on how he hated Seifert and jumped on his car and didn't do a very nice thing to his car. And he said, get that guy out of here. And you said this, I'll take him.
Yeah. Actually, John McVay called me about Charles. And that's how because I'd already made some trades with the 49ers and John McVay. Actually, Sean's grandfather. But so, I worked out the deal with Charles Haley. Now, Jerry was involved in the Charles Haley trade. He picked him up at the airport and drove him to the facility. During that period of time, Jerry was trying to pay off that loan. He was working on business and paying off bills. He wasn't involved in a lot of football.
Was he ever involved in any of the decision makings during your time?
Yeah, well, you got to look at it this way, Dan. He wrote the checks. He was the owner. And so obviously I couldn't have done some of the things I did unless he okayed it, because he was going to pay the money. And so we had to be involved together a lot that way. But, really, again, and in all seriousness, his first 4 years, he borrowed $140 million, and he was trying to pay the bills. And, he's as charismatic a guy. He's the best businessman I've ever been around in my life. He's passionate. He works around the clock, and so, he did some great things. But those early years, personnel and football wise, it was pretty well over in our department.
Okay, I'll leave you with this, Coach. Who's one of your top 5 favorite players of all time? Thank you very much. Who's one of your favorite Hurricanes of all time? I'll take it. But I will tell you this, Coach. I told people this story a long time ago, and I'm going to leave you with this. So here's to show you kind of guy that Coach is, and I know that he knows this story. So I take a couple blankets and some pillows out of the Don Shula Hotel, and Jimmy comes running from across the field. Did you take those blankets? And I go like, by the way, the guy you see on Fox, that ain't the same dude. Okay, just so all you guys know, that ain't the same guy I know. Okay, and so I said, I did, Coach. He goes, why? And I go, because I don't have any blankets or pillows. And he goes, for God's sakes. The next day I walk in there, Kevin O'Neal's leaving. I got blankets and sheets, and I've got toothpaste and brushes and everything there. I come walking over to Coach Johnson, and I go, Coach, he goes, for what? Don't do stupid stuff like that again. Get back in right. And I went like this, right?
Hey, I'll give it to you. You don't have to steal it.
That's right. And you went, don't do that again. Coach, you know how much I love you. I appreciate it so much, you finding time for me. Thank you again, Coach, for doing this. I appreciate it.
All right, Dan, I enjoy your show.
Thank you very much. Jimmy Johnson from the NFL on Fox, man. Yeah, that story's true. Don't forget Swagger. There it is right there. Swagger, Jimmy Johnson. All good, my friends. Please hit the like button. Hey, I tell you now, Morgan & Morgan, proud sponsors of the National Football Show with Big Sills. Where the fee is free, my friends, this means this. They don't get paid unless you get your compensation for you and your family. If you're injured on the job, you're hurt on the job, finding an attorney is one of the most important things that you could possibly do. That is what Morgan & Morgan is all about. For the people, folks, that's not a slogan. That's who they are. That's what they do. And for the last 30 years, they've collected $13 billion in settlements for their clients when it comes to compensation. That's what Morgan & Morgan does. Size matters. They're the biggest law firm in the country. Nobody is going to push Morgan & Morgan around. With over 800 attorneys in offices in Philadelphia, New York, Florida, all across the country, the army of attorneys that Morgan & Morgan has for you is second to none. And this is what they are, and this is who they are. Look, the consultation's free. The call is free. Call them at 800-512-1600. That's 800-512-1600. There's nobody bigger, and there's nobody that's going to go to battle for you more than what Morgan & Morgan does. And do me a favor. When you call Morgan & Morgan, tell them Big Sil sent you.
After a car crash, the big insurance companies you see advertising on TV, they may try to downplay your case and might say it's only a fender bender or it's just a herniated disc. I worry that some law firms fall for this BS. Not us. We put ourselves in your shoes and ask, what would it be like to be in your pain for the rest of our lives? $1 million wouldn't be enough for me. There's only one Morgan & Morgan. ForThePeople.com.